Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about... This podcast is going to be about Femico. That's the name for a chemical, very important chemical that plants use, or the plants hold bacteria, and the bacteria use to make fertilizer from just pure sunlight and nitrogen gas. Actually, this is a key molecule. And what I'm going to talk about is how uncannily it looks a bit like a Hawthorn football player, Aussie rules football player, holding a footy, nonetheless. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to actually talk you through what molecules are, what atoms are, and of course, most importantly, what Hawthorn is and what Aussie rules football is. So, if you're in another country or don't have expertise, sit back and listen as I talk through it. As I've said, this particular molecule, so a molecule is the name for something which has got multiple atoms in it. Something which has got multiple atoms in a particular order is a chemical. So a particular characteristic ordering of atoms in a molecule is called chemical. And this particular chemical, because it's used to initiate other chemical reactions, is called an enzyme. That's basically what we call when biology makes up a molecule which actually promotes chemical reactions. That chemical is called an enzyme. So you don't have to remember all these terms. I'm going to just use some basic terms, but anyone who's interested, this would come off. So obviously, life is a system of amazing chemical factories, and the actual chemical factories which actually convert food into energy and more of life. So life carries on by making the chemicals which reproduce itself. So in order to do that, it needs little machines called these enzymes. These are chemical machines which make more chemicals. Now, the important chemical that this makes is basically ammonia. So it takes nitrogen gas and eventually sunlight, mixes them together, and water, and out comes ammonia and nitrates, eventually nitrates, which is, as you would know, ammonium nitrate is your basic urea, is your basic fertilizer. And the fertilizer that gets used up, it has to be made somewhere. So it's actually made by bacteria, which actually is a process called fixing nitrogen. So I'm just giving you all these terms. Don't listen to the terms too much, and we'll talk you through it. But this is this particular molecule, and it's actually got a code name called FeMoCo. Now I don't know what the co stands for, but Fe means iron, and Mo means molybdenum. That's just an element in the periodic table. So molybdenum's underneath chromium, if you want to go through there. And walking across the periodic table, you've got sodium, calcium, scandium, vanadium, scandium, titanium, vanadium, chromium, and underneath chromium is molybdenum, right down there in the periodic table if you want to look at it. And this is one of the things I'm doing, is getting my brain back up and just talking about it. I'm also learning to podcast, and there's a whole series of things I'll talk about. So this particular molecule doesn't itself, if you looked at it on a microscope, it would be a grey sort of, if you had a powerful enough microscope, it would be just a sort of a grey, dense coloured blob. But we have this thing that we associate different colours with different atoms, and so in order to actually, because all atoms look alike, we colour atoms artificially, so we can tell what team they're from. You know, they're forming a bit of a scrum, so it can see the team. So this is basically a scrum of atoms around this footy in the centre. This is cross codes. This is rugby. And we don't form scrums in Aussie rules, but this colouring that we selected, just as we selected as we coloured the atoms, you look at it and you hold up the thing, you turn it around 90 degrees and you say, my God, that looks a bit like a Aussie rules jersey. That's because it's got the same colours as this football team. But we'll talk into that a bit more. A bit more about my myself, sort of while I'm doing podcasts and stuff like that, so it will sort of make some sense. Because what happens is there's been a series of podcasts, and I haven't known everything. I've actually read and discussed about things, and so if you listen back, you can hear me actually learn, which is possibly more interesting than actually listening to this podcast. But I'm podcasting because, like a sportsman, I've had not a knee reconstruction, but a heart reconstruction, and that's where they've taken out a dicky pit past my heart and implanted basically a mechanical robotic version of it. It's been a great. But along the way, when they get into your heart, put you underneath, and there's all this crap going around. Sorry, I shouldn't say crap. Blood clots going around your head. You have small strokes, and your brain gets really knocked about. And so it's sort of like recovering from, or it is a brain injury. So I've had to get in there and just start podcasting away, and I'm podcasting about 5 lessons a day, and just to get the skill level up, I've written a quiz and a puzzle and puts an app per lesson. And in order to get this done, I've had to sit back and actually write the software to enable me to do it and get the practice up. And in generally, the first couple of podcasts is just string a couple of words together and keep on topic for a while. Now, as I'm improving, I'm actually realizing, certain times of the day that I get really interrupted all the time. I can't do a podcast this time of the day. It's a bit afterwards. So that time of the day, I sit down and say, look, one of the things I have in these podcasts is they're not structured. I'll write some notes. So I actually have some notes in front of me. Like a professional footballer, but a professional teacher, in the off-season, I've been injured. I'm going through recovery. I'm up to 800 plus podcasts. I want to get to well over 1,000 podcasts and get up doing it. I'm just feeding into the podcast of building up, and I'm having surprises as I'm beginning to remember things. Like you heard me remember the periodic table. It's a big struggle. I think I've had 20 podcasts just on the periodic table as I've just slowly learning, and there's still areas here, a couple of elements which I'm a bit woolly on in the lanthanide, so to speak. So the actual basics of it is that you have got this unique thing. Normally you have just a polished program. If you want to go back, you can actually go back, further back, and hear me say I do molecular tours. So in order to just molecular tour, I don't know whether you're interested in it, but it's a way of, when you look at a molecule, to go through it and remind you of the shape of the molecule, the function of the molecule, and each functional group when you're teaching it later on. Not that you teach at school level the functional groups of molecules, aldehydes and alcohols and acids and amines and structures like that, but the actual process of looking at a molecule and actually talking it through, teaching it, is there. Now, you've got no one in front of you, so what else can you do but just give a molecular tour? And so I give a molecular tour of caffeine, chocolate, dopamine, various nerve agents, mustard gas, garlic, various things like this. And I got curious, and of course, as soon as I saw the Femico molecule, I said, that's a fantastic molecule, because I love molecules which are complex in 3 dimensions, or have got flat bits are structured, or when you just tweak them a bit, they change shape. And this is important for indicators. They change shape with acids, and therefore change colour, and to understand the colour and all that type of stuff. But Femico, which is this one, the Hawthorn football jersey one, was absolutely fascinating. And it was something which was screaming at you, this can't be done by organic chemistry. One of the reasons is that Femico is actually made out of not too much organic stuff. It's actually iron, sulphur, and molybdenum at the top of it. It's actually a crystal, and people are drawing bonds hither to in all 3 dimensions of, it's like drawing a organic bond of salt. Is actually fact is a type of salt. So looking at it, I began to, as a podcaster, I said, "Oh, look, this is something I could give you a basic story. There are these things, and you can actually listen to me saying, oh, look, there's layers of sulphur and layers of iron in this organic molecule. It's just unusual." And then obviously, as I sit back, I say, that's semiconductor. The bacteria are making semiconductors. I go into the books and I go, yep, FES2, this is FES, more or less, or it's FE7S, S9. It'll really, there's more sulphur than the irons, just by the way of it. It's shaped in a particular shape, but it is actually a semiconductor. And it's a nanocrystal. And it's got a band gap, and you don't use organic chemistry for it, you use other things, and it's got mechanical properties, and it's got a cage-shielded atom inside it, so it's a quantum dot, and you've got all these things, and it's been made by bacteria, and it's sitting right in the front, and this realization happened well after I did the last podcast, perhaps yesterday, I think. I said, oh, no, I began looking and checking, and it's a semiconductor. It will have a band gap. It's got these structures. It's got all this type of stuff. But moreover, I think it's got certain colours and stripes if you rotate it. And I said, perhaps the colours of Hawthorn are. I'll go into Hawthorn in a little while later. Are yellow and brown, and then I can remember that sulphur's yellow in these molecular kits. This is sort of like trivia. You know, what are the colours in your molecule set? Whites for oxygen, blacks for carbon, reds for oxygens, blues for nitrogen, greens for chlorine, sort of an acid. Green is for fluorine, and lo and behold, brown is for iron. Brown is a rust colour. They select these things, but so it goes brown, yellow. Oh my God, that is. And so I went back and I checked and looked at the colours, and yeah, indeed, it's all okay. So this is sort of how you're doing podcasting, and the brain's switching on again very slowly, so to speak. Yeah, so normally, so previously I could look at a molecule and memorize it. Now it takes days, or the periodic table. I sort of just knew it, and now I have had to go back and re-burn it in. And would have heard me taking 3 weeks to completely learn the periodic table back to front. I'm still not there, but just the actual cross information and the I don't know, dangers of the periodic table. So many elements beginning with the letter R, going ruh. And there's ruthenium, rubium, rhodium, rhenium, radium, radon, so going through. So imagine if you are slightly dyslexic and you come up and you just remembered it by the letter, you can then, it's impossible. You need to put other structures in. And so that's giving you a little bit of a background. But now you can just relax for a moment. We've got to do too much science. I'll go back and give you some scales and science later on. Now we're going to do a tour of Aussie rules football. So I'm saying it's like the Guernsey as its team. And yeah. You're sitting back in a podcast, so I can talk you through a little bit more. So Aussie rules football started off in Australia. And what happened is that cricket was big in Australia back in the 1840s. Like we were founding towns, and basically the first thing that people did was build a cricket pitch in a town, and everyone would have teams. Now, a cricket team has 11 players, and the reason it has 11 players is that the Saxons and Celts, from which cricket arranged, had a number system, not based 60 as the Babylonians, or 20 as the Mayans, or 10 as the Romans and everybody else. They had a base 11 system, So I don't know how you did it. Everything was to the 11th. That was one of the things. And so the natural number of people in a team is count, well, just fetch me 11 players, fetch me 11 eggs, fetch me 11 whatever it is, fetch me 11 players. And just incidentally, they weren't that strong in numbers. And so in order to keep score, they actually got a piece of wood and scored the piece of wood. And you keep the score. No one could count, but then at the end of the day, they go, oh, you got more than that. This is how ancient cricket is. But Australia had the problem that in the summer months they had the cricket teams. In the winter months, you had all these cricket teams mucking around, wanting to share a cricket pitch to actually practice on. So what they did is they put 2 cricket teams together, 2 of 11, to make a footy team of 22, and the other footy team was 22, and on the same cricket pitch you could exercise 44 players. So there are actually 44 players in an Aussie rules match coming along. And what's the general thing? Well, the Irish, apparently Irish people around, and they said, oh look, you get a pig skin bladder, you blow up the pig skin bladder, which turned into the Australian rules footy, and it's basically Irish football came across and got melded into this cricket to form Aussie rules footy. So Irish football is not like your soccer, you pick up the ball and you kick it. And so much so, it's similarities, so much so that people can actually reverse the DNA of both games, or forward it, I suppose, change the Irish. And so there is actually Australia versus Ireland in this rather bespoke match where they have slightly modified rules of both, and it allows both teams to play. And so throughout Australia, it's sort of in isolation, it's a really isolated country. This evolved, and different groups, university groups, working class groups formed their own footy teams. So you've got Collingwood and Hawthorn, which is more from the farmers. So Hawthorn, that part of Melbourne, used to be a bit farming, a bit rural. Like the Hawthorn's a fairly famous area, not famous area, but it's a bit more of a, now it's sort of completely urban. Back in the day, there were paddocks and stuff like that. And this actually formed the Hawthorn Regiment of citizens, just off the street. Were, oh my God, Singapore's full on the Australian armies in the desert. Just Darwin's going to be invaded, and so just pack everyone in a boat and go up and man Darwin. Darwin's the northern capital of. This is during World War II, when the Japanese are coming down into Australia, and this has got a relation to the Hawthorn area, because the Hawthorn Regiment and the Western Sydney Regiment came up. They're just packed in boats. They had sort of had a 7-day bivouac camp. And what was that? The next thing is you've got some Japanese to fight in the jungle up there. And these 2 militia regiments went up and fought in the jungle. But they took Aussie rules with them in both cases. But let's go back. You've got Aussie rules. Now, the system's changed as, for Australian conditions, we lost the rugby jumpers with the long sleeves and stuff like that, and it became eventually, in the heat, became short sleeves. So you've got these little short sleeve knitted vest, and I don't know if you know, 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds, they have a bit of a bod with a big 6-packs and a tightly small stomach, and so you have this football jersey, which is Guernsey. It's a jersey. I don't know what it is. It's whatever you call it, the football jumper they have, but it's sleeveless, and you've got the big Ripley arms going out, and very short, very tight pants on, and that's your Aussie rules football player. And Hawthorn. Which, now let's say what Hawthorn's like. Hawthorn's like a football club. So everyone would know what Manchester United is, or Madrid. Well, I think it's Madrid Real. I actually don't know the actual teams, or the Dodgers, or the Yankees, or the Toronto. Oh, is it Chicago Red Sox or White Sox? I don't know. The Toronto, not Bluebirds, something or other. Blue Jays. Blue Jays. They're a team. So they're a team with a large following, and they've just recently, in the last, in this decade, won 3 grand finals in a row. So it's got a huge following, and they often talk about them having the nappy colours, as you do, because they're yellow and brown. It doesn't look all that bad, but there's stripes down, and now with advertising, they wear basically a different jersey every game to signify Indigenous round, or all the things are linked to. There's a round, an Anzac round. It's all sort of linked into Australian culture, and so they wear a different Guernsey for all different. And they have home and away Guernseys and all that stuff. The basic, is it Guernsey? I think, I'm not quite sure. Is the nappy colours, and it's brown and yellow, brown and yellow and brown. And that so happens to go with the colourings of this particular molecule, which is brown and yellow and brown and yellow and brown. So actually, you'll see a picture of it. It looks exactly like it now. It's absolutely incredible molecule. So most organic stuff is that they have organic molecules. So an organic molecule, let's go what a molecule is. A molecule is atoms which are stuck to each other, and they're stuck to each other because they share electrons. So they're charged, but they actually borrow each other's electrons, and in order to do it, they stick together. So what I'm going to leverage now is another area of education, which I'm pioneering, I suppose. Pioneering's the word. I suppose I'm first, that's why you call it a pioneer. It is called the small verse, and that's where everything is expanded 1 billion times. So if you expand basically a hydrogen atom 1 billion times, it's the size of an orange. If you expand an orange 1 billion times, no, that's going to be insane. It's probably the size of Neptune if you expanded orange 1 billion times. Yeah. But if you expanded an oxygen molecule 1 billion times, it would be the size of a footy, of a football. We have an oval-shaped football. But if you expanded this Femico thing 1 billion times, it would be the size of a large, I suppose, washing machine, something like that size, and it is square and stuff like that. Now most organic molecules involve carbon. We're carbon life form, the carbon molecule, and this is the closest thing to actually a plant making a piece of electronics, or bacteria making a piece of futuristic electronics, and it's one of these things that you're walking along and you just going to do a rehab. What molecule shall I do now? And you go, what the heck is this? Because it's actually I think a lot of you would know a salt, a crystal of salt, sodium chloride. It's got a sodium and chlorine structured around a sodium stuck in between it. This is a sodium which is a metal, and a non-metal which is chlorine. This is a similar combination. This is iron, which is a metal, okay, iron atom, and this is sulphur, which is a non-metal. Now, sodium chloride, it's 1 electron each. Here, it's a bit different. Iron loses 2 or 3 electrons, and sulphur takes up 2 electrons. It's like oxygen. Sulphur's beneath oxygen in the periodic table, and iron goes, if you go across, scandium, titanium, vanadium, chromium, manganese, which is just a pretty credible element, then iron. Across that's where iron is, and they're all in their transitions, they're all 2 or 3, although the thing with the molybdenum is that you can get 5, very high valency coming off, and sulphur. So they go together. So it forms basically a salt crystal. What it does is so normally, as most of the most inorganic that you normally get in life is an organic compound with a little bit of inorganicness on one of the side chains on one of the amino acids. That's as much as you get, or you get a whole set of amino acids just clawing onto a piece of you get them clawing onto a molecule, which it's like inorganic chemistry, inorganic chemistry in organic chemistry. Well, the second one is 2 separate words. It's pretty rare, and so when you see this is sort of just, it hurts to even look at it. And so when I looked at it, this molecule. So what it is like your salt crystal, you have, if you rotate the salt crystal in a particular way, you've got layer through a different angle. You've got layers of sodium, chlorine. That's just the way salts organise themselves. This is organised with a layer of iron, and the first layer is 1. The next layer is 3 sulphurs, then another layer of iron, and then another layer of sulphur. Now, there's only 3 sulphurs in this next layer because it's building up from an upside down pyramid upwards. And in the middle of that layer is a black little carbon, or a little carbon atom, which is held there, and it's held there in an inorganic fashion because it's not standard organic 4 bonds. It has 6 bonds. So that's crazy. And then you keep on, it's like this layer cake. You've got this central layer, so it's iron, sulphur with the carbon, iron, sulphur, and then initially iron, but then the iron gets replaced with a molybdenum. Now, but part way through in the construction, it is iron. The molybdenum gets put, and the molybdenum is this, in terms of colour, is this sort of blue, much bluish thing with a tinge of green in it. I suppose you'd call it teal or something like that. So it's not quite there. Now, this structure, a crystal with a defect in it, a semiconductor crystal with a point defect in it, which this is by definition a quantum dot, and this is a semiconductor. Why do I say it's a semiconductor? Because they used to make semiconductor rectifiers with out of iron sulfide, because this grows like a crystal. This is like this enormous crystal. It's called a cat's whisker crystal. These cat's whiskers would be this semiconductor wire made out of this stuff. It's just mind blowing. Now, I don't know what the band gap energy with this. I don't know how you define a band gap with this so few molecules in it, but it's getting down there to absolute quantum mechanics now. So you can imagine my enormous joy looking at this. Like, I don't have any joy in my life, but enormous, like, what is it? Like, it's, what can you? I really am struggling to say. It's not. You can't. There's no one to speak to. You can't get excited about it. But it's something that you can't put down. You can't say. You say, oh, that bond system as it's described, organic bonding, is not the correct way to do it. And you're not going to phone up the paper or anything like this, or tell anybody. You just, no, that doesn't make sense. It's not something that you big note yourself by pointing out an error. It's just not an error. It's just not been seen properly, not been understood, and yes. So you put it down and you forget about you forget about it. But then you wake up and not wake up a few hours later. You go, oh no, that's what it is. It's like you're struggling to remember it, and you're saying, wow, this has got so many. Can you imagine a salt crystal treated by organic chemistry? It's sort of like, it's obviously mad, and your head saying, well, Pete, Dr. Hill teach, you gotta be able to do this one. That's this next thing. And you can't turn around to yourself and say, "Why, I'm not going to be teaching at this level." But it says, "No, you got to do it," and sort of like your own personal trainer inside your head. And your personal trainer said, "Look, you have to know these how to solve this with organic bonding," and then it sort of goes back, almost complaining to yourself, "Oh, that's not organic crystalline." So it's a pretty amazing thing that the fundamental driving point at life. It's sort of like the thing inside, the thing inside, the thing inside, the thing inside, which makes everything. Sort of like the little plot twist. Is this that life began to make semiconductors, that we make computers that actually beat us to it, and it's begun turning our nitrogen atmosphere, storing the nitrogen atmosphere into these really useful molecules. Carbon's really useful, but making carbon such that it can be stuck together in all these complicated forms quite easily and constructed at high speed, you need nitrogen. And where do you get the nitrogen from? Well, almost nowadays, a lot of the nitrogen that you're made up of has come from a petrochemical factory. But before the big Haber process, so a large percent of the world's energy, I think 2% of the world's energy, goes into making nitrogen fertilizer with energy, and that goes to make the plants, and we eventually. So a lot of the nitrogen that we eat, a sizable fraction, doesn't come from bacteria fixation, but before the big factories, the producing it. So I don't know whether people fully understand that we are an electronic connected society, but we are also a society built on judicious use solution of chemical equations, which allows us to have more food, more bountiful food. And of course the planet's not going there. But before that, nature has solved this, and it wasn't able to use something derived from nitrogen to build a precursor. So it's actually had to come up with what is this little bit of inorganic chemistry, quantum mechanics, to come across it. Now what actually happens, I'm looking at the process itself, I find it fascinating to see how it actually just constructs it. Fairly straightforward. It only has one crystal to do, but it's pretty amazing how it does it. But it also catalyzes it, and how the catalyzing works. Now, to be fair, how I said before, it's the best we can do is organic crystal with something a little bit organic. This has an organic protein on the side of it, a cis protein, which is the standard protein. So what that does is it actually binds the iron to another sulphur. Cis is one of your sulphur. They're two, cis and beta, your two sulphur ones. That's amazing what my memory's coming back to it. So when you have this crystal, it's got bands of iron and sulphur. And iron is brown, sulphur is yellow. And brown, if you have to turn it at an angle, brown and yellow, brown and yellow, brown and yellow. And in the center of it, it's captured as a quantum dot, as a semiconductor quantum dot, a single carbon atom. And it's really in a cage it's an organic cage. So normally organics wrap around inorganics. It's actually flipped it. It's got an inorganic cage with sort of fundamental organic thing. And I'm looking through it, but one can imagine that what happens is that different atoms go up to tackle this Hawthorn player thing, and they come off second best, and they come off modified, and that's essentially what an enzyme is. Finally, when you look at it, another aspect of it is that it looks a bit like a fish. It looks like a bit like Nemo, a Hawthorn Nemo, because it's got a bit of a tail, sort of organic amino acid tail, and a few other amino acids at the front of it. It looks a bit like a hawthorn fish. So that's the story of it now, and hopefully that will conclude it, and I'll pass this off to some of my mates, chemistry professor mates, one at UTS, Professor John Cunning, and see what he makes of it all. Thanks a lot for listening. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.